Hi. Well, it's a golden afternoon and I'm on a lovely calm bit of the Thames. Between Botley Road and the Port Meadow Bailey Bridge. I'm choosing spots on the Thames because Lewis Carroll and the Little Sisters and Carroll's friend would have passed over these spots when Carroll was telling Alice the story for the first time, the story that became Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And I don't imagine this part of the Thames has changed very much since that afternoon in 1862 either. And even better, for my purposes, it's got a seat, so I'm going to sit here and do the next reading rather than having to stand. So I'm now going to read chapter 3, a caucus race and a long tail. And just to recap, in chapter 1, Alice saw a white rabbit hurrying along and pulling out a pocket watch. She followed it, fell into a rabbit hole, fell down and down and down and down, and the fall ended safely. She hit a pile of dead leaves and sticks and found herself in a little hall, and there's a table with a magic potion on it, and the potion changes her size. And at the end of chapter 1, she started growing, and she opens out like a telescope. And the beginning of chapter 2, she starts worrying about how she's going to deal with this and how she can communicate with her feet when they're such a long way away, and she fancies about sending presents to her feet so that they will obey her orders nicely. Then she gets hold of a fan, and she's fanning herself rather sort of absent-mindedly, and it turns out that the fan reduces her size. But she's been crying earlier, and she falls into the pool of tears that she wept when she was crying while she was big. And she meets a mouse who's also swimming in the pool, and she tries to talk to it, but she has this rather bad habit of talking about cats and dogs, which doesn't really make the mouse feel very happy. But eventually they get over that, and the mouse is going to tell her what it is in his history that causes him to hate cats and dogs so much. And this is the end of the second chapter. The second chapter ends, "It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that had fallen into it." And there's a weird mixture of animals, including a duck and a dodo. And chapter 3, we'll see what happens to them. So Alice leads the way, and the whole party of animals swims to the shore of this pool of tears. So, chapter 3, a caucus race and a long tail. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank. The birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clinging to them, and all dripping wet, cross and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them, as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the Lory, who at last turned sulky and would only say, "I'm older than you and must know better." And this Alice would not allow without knowing how old it was. And as the lorry positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last, the mouse, who seemed to be a person of some authority, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. "Ahem," said the mouse with an important air. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all round, if you please." William the Conqueror, whose cause was favoured by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders, and had been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria— "Ugh," said the lorry with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said the lorry hastily. "I thought you did," said the mouse. "I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable." "Found what?" said the duck. "Found it," the mouse replied rather crossly. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means well enough when I find a thing," said the duck. "It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans—" "How are you getting on now, my dear?" it continued, turning to Alice as it spoke. "As wet as ever," said Alice in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all." "In that case," said the dodo solemnly, rising to its feet, "I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies." "Speak English," said the eaglet. "I don't know the meaning of half those long words. And what's more, I don't believe you do either." And the eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. And this is Tenniel's picture of the birds and other animals listening to the dry speech. Dry, of course, is a pun. Dry meaning not wet, and dry meaning really, really boring, like the mouse is reading now. "What I was going to say," said the dodo in an offended tone, "was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" said Alice. Not that she much wanted to know, but the dodo had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed inclined to say anything. "Why?" said the dodo. "The best way to explain it is to do it. And as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it. First, it marked out a race course, in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3 and away, but they began running when they liked, and left off when they liked, so it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over!" And they all crowded round it, panting and asking, "But who has won?" This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it stood for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last, the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" quite a chorus of voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger. And the whole party at once crowded round Alice, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair she put her hand in her pocket and happened to pull out a box of comfits. Luckily, the water had not got into them, and handed them all round as prizes. There was exactly one apiece all round. Oh, and there's a note. Comfits are hard sweets, made by preserving dried fruits or seeds with sugar, and then covering them with a thin coating of syrup. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied very gravely. "What else have you got in your pocket?" it went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," said Alice sadly. And this is the famous dodo drawing. That's the dodo. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more, while the dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion. The large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. But it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them something more. Okay, well that's all for this episode. Next time I'll get onto the mouse's tail and the mouse's history.